Intro, the power that speaks nothing. They don't talk to be understood. They don't explain to feel seen. They don't rush to fill the silence because they've learned something. Most never do. Silence is a language, a sharp one, a quiet one. A language that says everything. By saying nothing, and the ones who master it, the ones who don't need to speak to be felt, they walk in rooms like blades, clean, precise. They don't make noise, they make weight. People ask, why don't you say more? But what they really mean is, how do you say so much without saying anything at all? This isn't about being antisocial or playing games or hiding in shadows. It's about owning your voice so deeply that you only use it when it actually means something. They're not afraid to talk. They've just outgrown the need to prove themselves out loud. This video is about them, the ones who don't interrupt, the ones who don't compete for attention, the ones who speak less but move different. And if you've ever felt like you see too much, feel too much, say too little, you're not broken, you're just on a different channel. And that silence you carry, it's not weakness, it's your edge. Lead in, why silence hits harder than words. Most people speak to manage how they're perceived. They talk fast because they're afraid to be misunderstood. They over-explain because they want to be accepted. They overshare because they think vulnerability must be loud to be real. But the ones who speak less, they move different. They don't run from silence, they live in it. Because they felt what happens when you stop reacting and start watching. They've learned that most words are noise, that most questions don't need answers, that most conversations aren't built on truth but on habit. And they've stopped playing that game. They speak when the room's ready. They speak when it's real, and until then, they hold. They don't raise their volume. They raise their standard. They don't fight for attention. They command energy, because silence isn't absence. It's precision. It's patience. It's power, disguised as stillness. This isn't a video for people who want to be louder. It's for those who are ready to be felt without always being heard. Trait 1, they observe first. They don't walk in and speak. They walk in and scan, not the walls, not the lights, but the room beneath the room. The microsignals, the tension, the truths hiding between words. Because they've learned, people reveal more when they think no one's listening. So they wait. They slow. They gather data like a quiet storm. They listen with their eyes. They listen with their chest. They read the shift in body, the twitch in tone, the pause that said more than the sentence that followed. While others jump in, they fall back. Because every word you speak too soon is a detail you've lost forever. Observation gives them clarity. Clarity gives them leverage. And leverage makes their silence feel like a weapon. They don't just look, they see. And that difference is everything. Trait 2. They speak with precision. They don't throw words around like loose change. Every sentence is a selection. Every pause is loaded. Every silence before they speak is a filter being applied. Because they know, once spoken, words become arrows. And most people fire blindly, but not them. They speak like surgeons, not to fill space, but to cut through it. No fluff, no echo, just the core idea, placed where it matters most. They don't speak to be right, they speak to be clear. And if that means waiting longer, letting the moment stretch, they let it. Because the fastest voice is rarely the truest. And the first response is often the least refined. So they hold, they sharpen, they speak when the signal is clean and the noise is gone. Their voice doesn't rise, it lands, and when it does, you don't forget it. Trait 3. They don't need to prove. They don't talk to impress. They don't speak to defend. They don't explain who they are to people who never asked. Because when you know your worth, you don't perform it. You just carry it. They've outgrown the need to argue their value, to overstate their knowledge, to prove they belong. Silence has taught them something. Confidence isn't shown in volume. It's shown in what you no longer feel the need to say. They know if someone misunderstands them, it's not always their job to fix it. They don't rush to correct. They don't force recognition. Because what's real doesn't panic to be seen. They walk into rooms with their identity already sealed. They don't need the room to validate it. That's why they speak less. Not because they're unsure, but because they're already certain. And certainty doesn't shout, it stands. Trait 4. They control the frame. They don't argue, they shift the room. Not by talking over, not by dominating space, but by controlling the frame. They decide the context, they define the tone. And they do it without needing to raise their voice. Because power doesn't always interrupt. Sometimes it just doesn't flinch. They sit still while others spiral. They stay composed while others chase being heard. And in that calm, the room adjusts. The tension bends, the energy realigns. They don't need to correct every detail. They don't need to fact-check the noise. They just ask the right question, drop the right line, or say nothing at all, and watch everything tilt. Because real influence isn't about speaking the most. It's about anchoring the moment, so others can't drift. They don't just speak. They reframe, they recenter, they lead without announcing it. Trait 5. They choose when to disappear. They don't fear distance. They use it. They don't disappear out of weakness. They disappear to reset the field, because they know when you're always available, you stop being valued. They're not addicted to presence. They don't chase relevance. They don't need to be in every room to make an impact. Instead, they pull back, strategically, quietly, and in that space, they become felt. Because what's rare becomes sacred, and what's absent becomes louder than what's always speaking. They use silence as tension, distance as memory, and withdrawal as a reminder that they were never chasing, they were choosing. They don't storm out, they don't explain, they just vanish with grace. And the weight of their absence speaks louder than anything they could have said. They don't stay to be needed, they leave to be noticed. Trait 6. They listen to everything, respond to little plosh. They hear it all. The compliments, the slights, the digs wrapped in jokes, the tension behind smiles, but they don't bite. Because not every opinion deserves oxygen. Not every comment deserves clarity. Not every bait deserves a bite. They've mastered the art of listening without absorbing, of hearing without being moved. Because they know reaction is currency. And most people are bankrupt from giving it away too quickly. They don't jump into every debate. They don't defend every opinion. They don't validate drama by feeding it attention. Instead, they filter, silently, sharply. And when they do respond, it's not out of impulse. It's out of strategy. Not to prove they're right, but to show they're unshaken. They don't interrupt. They don't over-explain, they don't crowd the air, they sit back, they let others fill the space. And they watch, what happens when silence becomes pressure. Because some truths don't need to be said. They just need to be understood. Trait 7. They speak most through action. They don't talk about the grind. They just show up. They don't announce their next move. They just build it in silence. Their life is their volume. Their actions are their statement. Because when something is real, it doesn't need an audience. It just needs consistency. They've outgrown performance. They've stopped narrating their life for validation. While others post about the climb, they're climbing. While others seek praise, they're building without noise, without applause, without dependency. Because they know, if the results are clear, the explanation becomes irrelevant. They don't warn people, they don't overpromise, they just execute. Again and again and again. And that repetition, that quiet repetition, speaks louder than any rant ever could. They don't say, "Watch me," they say nothing. And then they let the outcome speak for them. Trait 8. They never explain their silence. They don't rush to fill the gap. They don't apologize for the pause. They don't explain why they didn't reply, didn't show up, didn't engage. Because they don't owe access. And silence is not a mistake that needs fixing. It's a decision that doesn't need defending. They don't ghost, they don't vanish out of immaturity. They simply withdraw when the noise gets too loud and the value gets too low. And when they do, they don't send disclaimers. They don't perform closure. They don't soften the boundary to be more digestible. Because their silence is not meant to soothe others. It's meant to protect themselves. They've realized if you need to explain every quiet moment, you've given the world too much of your inner room. So they hold it, they keep it, they let the world guess. Because mystery isn't manipulation, it's mastery. And some things are more powerful when left unspoken. Trait 9. They rarely repeat themselves. They don't say it twice, not because they're impatient, but because they're precise. They believe that if you didn't hear them the first time, you weren't really listening. And if you weren't listening, they're not interested in being louder. They don't chase understanding. They don't beg to be received. Because their truth doesn't depend on how many times it's said, only on how clearly it's owned. They speak once, measured, calm, direct. And after that, they exit the explanation loop. Because repeating yourself isn't always communication. Sometimes it's erosion of presence, of self-respect, of emotional clarity. They don't repeat boundaries, they don't repeat expectations, and they don't repeat warnings. They let people show what they're willing to hear, and they move accordingly. Because what they say matters, and what matters shouldn't have to echo to be taken seriously. Trait 10. They leave an echo. They don't speak often, but when they do, it stays, long after they've left, long after the sound fades, long after the room moves on. Their words echo, not because they're poetic, not because they're loud, but because they were earned. Earned by silence, by restraint, by choosing not to speak 1,000 times, before choosing that one moment to drop a truth. And when it lands deep. They don't fill space, they create it. And that space makes people think longer, listen harder, remember sharper, because when someone rarely speaks, you listen closer. They understand the paradox. The less you say, the more it weighs. And what carries weight doesn't need to chase relevance. It becomes unforgettable by being undeniable. So when they leave, they don't leave noise behind. They leave silence with shape. And that silence follows you. Out the ones who speak less. Move different. They're not mysterious. They're measured. They're not cold. They're clear. They don't speak less because they have nothing to say. They speak less because what they carry can't be explained in casual sentences. They've chosen presence over noise, clarity over chaos, depth over display. They move in silence because silence holds everything that performance can't. No, they don't speak much, but when they do, it cuts, it calms, it carries. So next time you feel the pressure to speak, to respond, to fill space, remember this: you're allowed to be felt without being loud. You're allowed to protect your words like they cost something, because they loud are noticed. But the quiet, they're remembered.